Technology has played a key role in international relations due to its close ties to economic and military power. What is changing today is not only the rapid pace of technological innovation, but also the way in which these innovations increasingly converge, creating a feedback loop that accelerates further advancements. Emerging technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, are expected to have a profound societal and geopolitical impact. And adding layers of complexity and uncertainty to their role in international relations. Diplomacy cannot remain indifferent to these shifts. Virtual embassies are being established, chatbots are employed to engage with citizens, and digital ambassadors are being appointed to build relationships with the Silicon Valley. AI is increasingly used to assess the consequences of political decisions during complex negotiations, predict political crisis, anticipate humanitarian disaster, and harness quantum computing for encryption with implications for mass surveillance. It is essential in this context that emerging technologies do not exacerbate the digital divide and existing societal biases and discriminations. And in this context, effective governance and regulation of these technologies are critical. All these questions and more will be discussed in this new series of events that we, together with the Club Diplomatique de Genève and Trust Valley, are launching today. Maybe just a quick note on how things will flow tonight. After introductory words from Raymond Loretan and Ambassador Benedikt Wechsler, we will move on to the panel discussion here with Professor Corneliu Bjola, Amanda Craig, who will be online, and Ambassador Benedikt Wechsler. We will conclude with a Q&A session. Allow me to introduce very briefly all our speakers. Ambassador Benedikt Wechsler is the head of the digital division at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Switzerland. Raymond Loretan is the president of the Diplomatic Club of Geneva and former ambassador of Switzerland. Lennick Pedron is the director of Trust Valley and president of ICON. Amanda Craig, who will be joining us online, leads Microsoft responsible AI public policy team. Professor Corneliu Bjola is professor of digital diplomacy at the University of Oxford and head of the Oxford Digital Diplomacy Research Group. So to you all, a warm thank you for being here. And before giving the floor to Raymond Loretan, I would like to extend a special thanks to not only our partners and co-organizers, Club Diplomatique and Trust Valley, but also to the team who made this event possible at the Geneva Graduate Institute. That includes our event team, who are here with us today, and as well the team of Strategic Partnership, Natasha and Lena. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Lennick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jérôme. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tech Diplomacy Talk, Building Trust in AI. I'm honored to open this dialogue, Building Trust in AI, to look at AI and its impact on diplomacy with key focus on trust. This year, more than 50 national elections are taking place across the globe. In the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report 2024, AI risk emerged at the top. One of the reasons is the recent development of AI and LLM. AI tools like ChatGPT and so on is rapidly changing our world and bringing new capabilities to people everywhere. new capabilities to business to innovate and improve efficiency, new capabilities to government to enhance public services, new capabilities to the UN agency to accelerate the progress towards the SDGs. However, this technology is also challenging. Key concept of national state, international relation, and trust. This call for new responsibility and roles for diplomats. The Trust Valley, as a digital trust center for excellence, is glad to organize this event to explore this new responsibility and how diplomats can adapt to AI-driven world. With this first dialogue, what we want to do with the Club Diplomatique and the Graduate Institute is to open the conversation, to tackle the adverse outcomes of AI technology. The idea of this event emerged 1 year ago with Raymond Loretan, and I'm so glad, so honored to welcome you, Raymond, on the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, friend of the Diplomatic Club of Geneva. Indeed, 1 year ago, we had the Trust Valley Day at the EPFL, and during a speech, I thought that this topic was so important and so interesting, then I said, why not in Geneva, and why not for diplomats? And here we are now today. And for me, a great pleasure to welcome you all to this series of events about tech diplomacy talk. We said it's a joint initiative. Diplomatic Club alone could not have made it without the Institute and, of course, the Trust Valley organization. Our goal here is to bridge the gap between technology and policy, equipping participants with the knowledge and skills to navigate the rapidly evolving technological landscape. To launch this series, we choose to explore the critical issue of building trust in AI. Trust in AI is not only about algorithms or data, it's about ensuring that these technologies are developed and used responsibly, transparently, and with a human-centered approach. As diplomats, policymakers, and industry leaders, we have definitely a shared responsibility to foster an environment where AI can be trusted to serve the public good. The question of trust in AI, and it may sound a little bit naive, but it's the reality. It's a question touching on ethics, security, transparency, and accountability. It requires to think deeply about the ways in which we deploy this instrument and to ensure that its benefits are accessible to all without compromising on the values of fairness, respect, and human dignity. This is where diplomacy plays a crucial role, serving as a bridge between innovation and the international standards and norms that guides our action. And we must ask ourselves, how do we ensure that AI is developed and used in ways that respect human rights and foster equality? How do we address these ethical dilemmas and potential bias that can arise from these technologies? And most importantly, how do we ensure that AI serves the many and not just the few? I'm sure a few of you were there when we organized last year a conference with Giuliano De Empoli, who presented his book, The Engineers of Chaos, and shows very clearly how you can manipulate an election, a campaign. And we have an interesting example actually right now going on. I'm not going to mention any country. But all these questions are not easy, and the answer will require collaboration, dialogue, and commitment to share values across borders and industries. We need to break down the silos between technology and policy, theory and practice, and vision and action. And tonight's event is a step in that direction. And of course, I encourage you, each of you, whether you are diplomat, technologist, policymaker, or student, to share your perspective and your expertise to this crucial conversation. Let us remember that the future of AI is shared responsibility, one that requires our collective wisdom, action, and commitment to building a more inclusive digital world. I give now the floor to Benedikt Wechsler, my former colleague and brilliant AI expert. Benedikt.
Distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, it's always a hard, tough one to follow up such a good colleague like Raymond, but I still try. I also would like to congratulate this initiative by the Graduate Institute and the Diplomatique de Genève, and of course also Trust Valley, because the most important thing when you want to create trust is bring people together. I think one of the persons who knew that very well was the founder also of the HEI at the then time, William Rapart, who actually thought, how can we keep the Americans in Europe after the war? And I think something like that is what we need these days in the tech world. And you did already quite well by having famous alumni like Brad Smith from Microsoft, that we really can also appreciate his commitment to governance and international cooperation, because he has this gene and this DNA, what he learned during his studies in Geneva. And forgive me for a little bit of a look back into history as well. In the 19th century, when you looked at new technologies that came up, like trains, railways, I mean, you don't only need to watch Western movies to know that taking a train back then was very dangerous. Bridges were collapsing, you got robbed, and so on. You could imagine that we wouldn't take trains today if the level of security would still be at that stage. So what did some people do in the 19th century who believed in the future of railways? They met in Bern on May 10th in 1886. It was the first international conference of technical units of the railways. They say, you know what, we have a problem. We want to move our wagons from one country to another. How can we trust each other that a French wagon is safe in Switzerland or an Italian wagon in Germany? So what they did, they sat together and they designed the Key of Bern. And actually, when you take the railways today, it's still in the pockets of the conductors in the train. Because this one was a key they designed specially so that they could open the doors and cupboards only by the train clerks. And then they said, well, now we solved an issue. Right? We have a tool to create trust and security. But there might be other questions coming up. So they founded the International Railway Organization, OTIF, which still exists today. Then, you know, we had the postal union in Bern, which made sure that letters don't get opened all the time. You had even the first ITU organization in Bern, which was founded in, I have to look it up again, it was 1868, with 3 employees, 2 Swiss and 1 Belgian. But then, you know, time evolved, and diplomacy is governance, and governance creates trust, and that moved more and more to Geneva. And I don't need to convince you here, but if you still need to be convinced, you can consult the Geneva Digital Atlas that we published together with Diplo Foundation and the Geneva Internet Platform. There we see like the Geneva is already the main digital governance hub of the world. If you want to have it a little bit more handy, we also made a digital Geneva passport where you find everything on QR codes, which is on these 600-700 pages. Now, let me briefly turn to what we want to do as Switzerland with the foreign policy in digital foreign policy. We were actually some of the first countries who really designed a digital foreign policy. We have 4 action fields. One is cybersecurity, because no development is possible, no digital infrastructure is possible if it's not safe. Then we want to promote sustainability with the digital foreign policy and promote digital governance and digital self-determination. Now, I would like to present you just one example, a recent example, what does that mean concretely, and especially also on AI. When ChatGPT came up, we were thinking, well, what could we do as Switzerland now in this point in time? That we don't want to start regulate all directly. We want to know first, what is really happening, what is possible. So, and then learn about the risks. So what we launched is the Swiss Call for Trust and Transparency in AI, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative where we have the best scientists, the leading companies, and diplomats working together on 2 issues. One is how to create more safety, and that's a process which you call red teaming. And red teaming, so far, every company does it on its own. So, we tested it, it's fine, Raymond, you can use it, no worries. But they don't tell you why and how they did it. So what we said, if you cooperate in that format, you have to share your lessons, you have to share your data, you have to explain what were the problems you encountered, and then share it. That is something which hasn't been done, and that creates trust in the use of AI. And then the other component is that in AI, today, the most scarce resource is the supercompute power. And Switzerland, thanks to some very wise investments by our universities, just inaugurated last Saturday the Alps supercomputer, which counts among the top performing supercomputers for AI in the world. And we can compete on a level with even big tech companies. And we owe this also, because it's taxpayers' money, we also want to use this for a good purpose, supporting our foreign policy goals, like achieving the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. So we set up the ICANE network. It's the International Compute for AI network that we launched together with the 2 supercomputers. The one is Alps in Switzerland, and the other one is the Lumi in Finland, which, I don't know who speaks Finnish, but Lumi means snow in Finnish, so it's a good combination, Alps and snow. We need both. And with this now, we can start using this technology for making use cases in the humanitarian field, but also for better weather forecasts, better agriculture, and working together with data scientists in Africa. And at the same time, by using this technology, we also get insights about what is the dangers, what are the risks. And then we can start maybe regulate some areas that we think, this is really getting out of hand. But then we know what we're talking about. So I think that is really very much the Swiss spirit that we want to use in this field, and which we are convinced is creating trust. And again, the most important thing is that we share our experiences with that, and that's also the objective of this ICANE network, where actually also the Graduate Institute is also participating in the first founding meetings. So I hope I could give you a little insight about what the Swiss digital foreign policy means, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and the other inputs. Thank you very much.
So we have the pleasure to welcome one of our speakers online. Amanda, hi. Hope that you can see us and hear us. I guess you can, so that's wonderful. Welcome. So thank you very much for the very interesting opening remarks to situate the context and the discussion in Switzerland. My first question will be for you, Professor Bjola. How is AI changing diplomacy and multilateralism? And how does AI differ from other disruptive technologies?
Thank you very much, Jerome, for first of all, for inviting me to speak, and also to the Geneva Institute and the Diplomatic Club. Just to build on the very interesting example that was offered before 1866 and the development of the first international organization on train connections, and something else happened about the same time, which I think it connects with your question. As a new technology, the telegram became quite fashionable at that time, especially also in diplomacy. There's a foreign minister, British foreign minister at that time, Lord Palmerston, who said when he saw the first telegram that this is the end of diplomacy as we know it. And his reasoning was that, look, with the telegram now, the human in the loop more or less disappears. So that was 1861, 1862. Well, almost 200 years, 150 years later, diplomacy is still alive and kicking. And there is another question now, to what extent a new type of technology, AI, is emerging and transforming the way in which international affairs connect with each other. So in order to answer the question, I think we have to think a little bit about what change means in this context. What exactly is the nature of the change that these technologies produce? I think there are three categories that we have to think. One has to do with the time. It's a big issue of time here in terms of acceleration in which these decisions that we have to take in diplomacy, and that changes substantially the way in which you think and communicate and engage with the others. In the past, you used to have, remember, Congress of Vienna took about 6 months to discuss conditions of post-Napoleonic wars in Europe. Nobody conducts convention now, for 6 months. A summit, I remember after the Russian invasion on the 23rd of February, the first summit, NATO summit, took place online. So we have to think that there is a time acceleration, and there is a lot of research into to what extent time acceleration creates pathologies. How do we cope in diplomacy and Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the question of time acceleration? Here comes AI, because one response that we have is that, in a sense, maybe these kind of tools can help us cope better to respond in real time to pressing issues. The second thing that we see in the digital age is the volume, incredible volume of data that is bombarding us on a daily basis at the individual level, but also at the level of institutions. There was a statistic showing that comparing with 1985, we now, on a daily basis, we basically face 5 times more data on a daily basis. How much is 5 times in terms of bits? It's more like a thin book, not exactly the book that the ambassador showed, but something. So we read basically a thin book every day from the type of information that we see around us, on the telephone, in the media. But we still have the same type of brain. So the amount of data that we see nowadays at the individual level and also at the institutional level is the second big challenge, which, again, going to AI promises somehow to help us with it. So we have time. We have a question of data that we have to do. And there is a third element which in diplomacy matters a lot, is the democratization of the diplomatic space. Congress of Vienna, you have what? 6, 7 foreign ministers coming together to decide the fate of Europe. Nowadays, I think when we discuss about diplomacy, it's not only states, We have also a new type of diplomatic actor, discussing with the ambassador before the event today, the tech companies, very, very powerful, more powerful than many states. Not only tech companies, we have private actors, the type of Elon Musk, that concentrate a lot of power and can shift the global agenda tremendously. And why is that important? Because power is disseminating differently. So just to go back to the question, what is AI changing, I think, or promising to change, is the way in which we deal with time, the way in which we deal with data, and the way we deal basically with the increasing number of actors. I think from this point of view, then thinking about multilateralism, I think that creates a new type of challenge for us. Are we able now, in terms of multilateral, diplomacy, to cope well with this kind of challenges? These organizations that we mentioned, some of them 1866, most of the organizations in Geneva, in Vienna, in New York, these are post-1945 organizations. This is the World War II legacy. The good news is that many of them adapt quite well to the new challenge. But there is an interesting question when we think about the multilateral, is whether we have the institutions well adapted to deal with the new challenge nowadays. It's not that they are not good. They deliver public goods. We need institutions. Without multilateralism, we are back where we used to be before, right? These big conflagrations. But there is a question about this multilateral institution being able to adapt and to integrate this kind of new technologies. There have been a lot of skepticism about the rigidity of international. I'm more optimistic now about international organization than I was 5 years before. Because through my research, I talked with many institutions in the UN network. Actually, they are some of them are pushing boundaries more than national states. And that, I think, I found it particularly interesting. So briefly, time, space, number of factors, and then, in terms of institutions, how to move actually in the digital age compared with 1945.
Thank you so much, Professor. For you, a question for you, Amanda. The professor told us about the total power of corporates. So you are working for Microsoft, and I have a question for you on how to build trust in AI. But what can the benefits of AI be secure and guardrail put in place to manage the risk?
Thank you so much for the question. Can you all hopefully hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Great. Okay. Just to check before I jump in. And thank you for the opportunity to join remotely. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person, but it's a real pleasure to be able to still participate in the conversation. So I would make two key points in thinking about putting in place the guardrails to manage risks so we can secure the benefits of AI and build trust. And one is really deepening our implementation of the sort of policy norms and concepts that have been recently defined while continuing to build out our public policy sort of architecture. And the second being, it'd be important to sort of approach our adoption and use of AI technology with recognition of the role that adoption and use actually play in continuously improving our public policy architecture and how we are implementing those norms and concepts. Because of the importance of kind of an iterative approach, given the time acceleration that was just mentioned and the need to really be agile for governance. So taking each of those in turn and going a bit deeper, thinking about deepening our implementation of existing sort of policy norms and concepts that have been recently defined. I'm thinking there about the work that's been done through multilateral forums in recent years, everything from the UNESCO's work on the AI recommendation, the work that's been done to build upon that in the last 18 months, or 20 months within the kind of G7 Hiroshima AI process that's really reflected changes with generative AI, large language models, carrying forward to what we expect over the next few days, over the next week with UNGA and with the Global Digital Compact. There's been all of this work to really put in place some effective approaches at a sort of high level in terms of like really what are we expecting technology providers and users to be doing at a high level to really strengthen guardrails and manage risks. But there's a lot of work to really be done in interpreting what those mean in practice, really doing that implementation of policy norms and concepts. And that's going to happen in a lot of places, and that's important because it's a lot of work to do that implementation, and it's going to take time. And so we see that work happening, for example, with the implementation of domestic policy and regulation, like the EU AI Act. We see that work happening with the G7 Hiroshima AI process, and the kind of continuation of that work in the context of the OECD building out a reporting framework whereby organizations that sort of voluntarily commit to the Hiroshima AI process code of conduct could describe what that means to them in practice. And we see ongoing kind of development of standards in ISO, for example, but also industry standards on issues like provenance and authentication. Being able to really identify when content is AI generated or otherwise generated. And so all of that is all of the implementation work, and all of that also needs to continue to kind of talk to each other, right? All of that work needs to talk to each other so that as the implementation moves forward, we're able to kind of maintain that coherence and how these regulatory and policy norms are being implemented. At the same time, there is this kind of need for ongoing effort around building out policy constructs and public policy architecture, where there's been a lot of conversation and effort over the last year about where there's going to be coordination on research to define really what we need in terms of the next steps for how to evaluate AI models and systems, and how to align on sort of a scientific understanding of risk. So that conversation is proceeding through the network of AI safety institutes. It's proceeding with what we expect the Global Digital Compact to sort of put forward with the independent international scientific panel. And there are opportunities to think about how those new kind of constructs can really work together to advance the science that's going to inform the implementation of the policy norms and concepts. And the last bit of this is just thinking about, again, how adoption and use of AI technology can be a part of this process of deepening implementation and continuously improving how we are doing this work in practice. Because as we adopt and use technology, we also learn how guardrails are working in practice and how they might need to be adjusted. So I actually bring this all back to the comments that have already been shared in terms of thinking about the kind of time acceleration that AI is sort of bringing to the fore, and the need for these constructs and the institutions that are working on them to really be agile and recognize the kind of continuous improvement life cycle that we need for putting in place guardrails. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Ambassador Wechsler, you talked in your keynote about diplomacy being governance. And we've had a number of examples from Amanda about how AI can be governed or is governed. My question to you is a bit broader. It's about power dynamics. How can AI change global power dynamics? And my question is here about the geopolitical implications of AI.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, governance is, in a way, it's a crystallized format of power relations. I mean, I remember when we were instrumental also in setting up the new UN Human Rights Council. There were some criticism. Yeah, but you give too much weight to actors who don't share our human rights values. So, well, that's the reality. That's the power balance of today, and it's maybe a bit different than right after the Second World War. So that is one thing, and I think also when you talk about power, sorry, I'm always coming back with old examples, but I love the International Labour Organization because they had a very innovative governance system back then, who had a tripartite council for the first time, that there were trade unions and employers associations with governments around one table, which were, I mean, arch enemies back then, but they knew, you know, they have the power to really improve the situations of the workers worldwide. So we have to have them around the table. That's why I think also tech companies today need to be around the table, and because they are building on a global infrastructure. And I think AI can work in two ways. I mean, power is also to influence people, minds or on the battlefield. And of course, AI opens new opportunities, unfortunately and fortunately, in terms of defense, but also in offense. You know, you can bring out more interesting ideas faster, in masses. But the basic thing which you need is for AI is also to have data. And that's probably also a little bit the problem we face in diplomacy, because for us diplomacy used to be, and it still is, it's a people's business. It's not a data business. You know, I think that's also something that we have to get used to, that we can transform our knowledge also into data that we can use. And you need the supercompute power to train models. But if this is readily accessible to the world, it can also have an equalizing and really effect. I mean, we work together with the most brilliant data scientists in Africa. They have, once we give them the supercompute power, they can do the most marvelous things. So that can also be, and also for the open source community, that they can create new possibilities. So I think it is, yeah, it is also has the possibility to change the power dynamic, that actually also smaller actors can raise their voice and can influence others.
Thank you, Ambassador. Super interesting to see that, yes, we have to work with workers, although that we will have an open source initiative in Switzerland, and I think this is the first one at a worldwide level. So for you, Professor, to go further with concrete action on what we can do with AI, can you give us some concrete example of how AI is being used in the context of multilateral diplomacy, please?
Indeed, and I think, just building on what the ambassador said, thinking about sources of power, what is the most valuable commodity nowadays? You used to think 300 years ago, the steam engine, right? And coal, very important source of power. Then oil, we still live in the oil. But now, data probably is the most important. When you think about AI, there are two elements that goes into AI. I think usually it's a comparison that is made with a rocket. A rocket has an engine and fuel in order to take off. The engine is the algorithm, the machine learning, the deep learning. The fuel is data. You need both in order to fly. So in a sense, you know, and that's, I think it's takes us to the question of where do we see these two elements together that can have an impact on multilateralism. I think there are three levels. One is the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is low-hanging fruit because from an organizational perspective, it's not seen as very risky. For instance, internal collaboration. You have a lot of data in multilateral organization in terms of treaties, of data, of correspondence. Think about COP, climate change. You need to prepare for COP coming up in December. How do you do that? You have a team of people going through different documents, positions of other papers, trying to find similarities in terms of positions, of ideas, of agreements, and then they create their own position and in order to negotiate something with, well, in this case, AI can actually do that. And it's being done. It's not difficult to do it. And it's not necessarily risky for the organization. If you get it wrong, you can still have time to fix it. Whereas another area in which you can see some progress being made is how to deal with more challenging circumstances. Like, for instance, understanding and managing crisis. Crisis meaning refugees, meaning conflicts. Can you do that? Do you have data for that? I think there's plenty of data. If you find the data sets, economic indicators, social media indicators, all kind of news reports, and some Ministry of Foreign Affairs are working on this. So you have the data, algorithms already there that you can put together. The problem is what you do with the results. It's a little different in terms of risk when you deal with something that could create trouble. So if you present a position based on the suggestions made by AI in a crisis situation, you cannot go to your superior and say, why are you asking me to take this position? And say, well, because the machine told me to do so. You have to provide more explanations for that. And there is a reason why there is a pressure now for AI to be explainable, to understand exactly the logic in the black box, how it gets to the decision in order to be able to cover that. So there is a question here about producing text, operating text, preparing negotiation. There is something more that deals with the idea of prediction, especially in terms of crisis, and so on. But there is a third element, which I think it's also valid. It's a question of training. And I think here, this is part of your initiative, and not only other organizations are doing, is that because you need to prepare people to increase their competence or the skills range that needs to deal with all these tools. What do I mean by this? What kind of skills you need when you use AI in a negotiation, for instance? Is it enough based on the type of competencies that were required from diplomats when they apply for an international organization? Being good, having knowledge of international law, political science, economics. Are they enough, or do you need something else? So operating AI, understanding the legal context, the governance issues, the risk that comes with it, understanding algorithms, because they come with biases, understanding how they work. These are skills that need to complement the repertoire of skills that already have. I think these are three areas in which you see different initiatives, and one is more like international preparation of negotiations, something more in terms of crisis management, but there is a lot of emphasis also on the question of training and simulation.
Just one comment about that. This is really a field that we need innovator with diplomats. So I think for that we are working in the Trust Valley on a new kind of startup, really new project related to peace tech. And I think 3-4 years ago, it was strange for a lot of people that we were working on that peace tech. What is peace tech? But I think right now with AI we can work on it. And yes, it's back to you, Jérôme.
Thank you. My question would be for Amanda. Amanda, you came. So I think you're in the U.S. You went to the UN Summit for Good. You're following the discussions and the negotiations around the Global Digital Compact. Could you maybe share with us your views on these very recent efforts to govern AI and the kind of international cooperation around AI governance and maybe digital technology at large?
Absolutely. So from our perspective, like the progress that's being advanced through the Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact is really important and really bringing attention to some of the core functions that we see a need for in terms of AI governance at the international level. So in particular, thinking about the proposal to establish the independent international scientific panel on AI being a critical step to really advance the interest that that we have and that we see others really share in strengthening global scientific risk or consensus on the risks of AI and also on the capabilities of AI. We actually embarked on an exercise last year around this time to reflect on what we could learn from other kind of domains of international governance about what real kind of value there is for international governance, in particular in those domains, recognizing that in the context of AI governance, as in other domains, you're going to have governance at the international level, at the domestic level, and among kind of a broader set of stakeholders, industry, civil society, and others working together to kind of implement governance norms. And so we were really trying to understand what's the unique value of certain kind of functions at the international level or really advancing certain interests. And one that really came to the fore for us through this process of looking across other domains, and in particular looking at domains like climate change and environmental sustainability work, is building scientific consensus and looking to models like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, as really being a prime example of how to do that work in other domains of building scientific consensus. And so this kind of effort through the GDC to advance this international scientific panel seems really valuable, and it will also need to kind of be pursued alongside the other international governance functions that are going to be really important for AI. And in that context, the global dialogue on AI governance that is being advanced through the Global Digital Compact is also really interesting and a good opportunity, I think, to have a kind of shared set of frameworks and a consensus at the global level about what all of those kind of functions are really needed at the international level for AI governance.
Thank you, Amanda. Maybe Ambassador, maybe what is your view as well on the Global Digital Compact and the upcoming UN Summit for the Future? If you have some key takeaways or ideas.
Yeah, I think in the world that we're living now, it's already, I think, the glass is more than half full that the states, all the states are sitting together and really working within the institution and come to an agreement. Because you could also imagine that some countries just walk away and say, well, what is irrelevant, or why do we need this? So I think this commitment is already there, and that we have for the first time probably. It's probably not a constitution or the Federalist Papers for the digital world, but that we have sort of some basic document about how this digital world needs to be structured, what kind of rules, what kind of values, and that we get to an understanding. And I think it's also important that we probably can see that we can de-ideologize some of the parts that even, I think one of the biggest questions for me is also, how can we bring China somehow to the table, that we have some global understanding that we won't use this technology to kill each other. I mean, this is expression MAD, mutually assured destruction, and I think, in the digital world, it's in a way possible. We could. I mean, we could have done it also with nuclear weapons, but we didn't, because we were able to build some rules and government structures to prevent this. And I think I'm optimistic that we will also succeed in that for new coming technologies like and AI. So I mean, what we think, of course, is, and what we still hope is that, that we really take the strength of the multilateral system there where they already are, and that we don't duplicate structures. And of course, coming back to Geneva, I think there's so much, such a rich ecosystem here that, and that this has to be sort of at the basis also of this. And of course, if something gets more important, it gets more political, even geopolitical, and then it's, it's no surprise that also a UN Security Council has a subject like cybersecurity on their agenda. So that's normal. But I think that's still the strength of Switzerland and Geneva, that we bring in this scientific perspective, evidence-based approach, and create a space, a platform for dialogue, which is extremely important. I think there it goes into the right direction.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Corneliu, the ambassador said that it's not a good idea to kill each other, I think too, and you. And what should diplomats and officials know about AI?
I agree. It's not good to kill each other. So but building on what also Amanda and the ambassador mentioned here, I think on the digital compact, let's look at the big picture. So what we see a little bit of fragmentation of governance. You have regions adopting regulation, EU on one hand, China going in a different direction, United States in a more laissez-faire type of traditional aspect. So where digital compact comes here is like an umbrella. It's trying to hold the center together. We have also to think that what is the role of the digital compact, of this regulation, is to help us learn a new language, a language that we don't know. It's in the same way when we try to learn French or Chinese or English. We need to know the words, but also the grammar rules. This digital language is different. Part of it, in terms of AI, we're discovering concepts. And we don't understand them very well. Just to give you an example, United States and Europe, in 2021, they created a new structure. They call it Trade and Technology Council. What do they do there? They meet twice a year, once in the United States, once in Europe. They've been 4 meetings so far, in which what they discuss, language. What do we mean by AI? What do we mean by risk? Because there are different perceptions of risk in the United States versus Europe. So we are building a language through this kind of treaties. It's a first step. We shouldn't overstate its importance, but we shouldn't understate it. It's a building block that will going to take us somewhere, because it's a total novel space here that we are trying to understand what is going on. We talk today about AI, artificial intelligence. We all understand the word artificial. It's not organic. It's not like us. The difficult part in that, it's intelligence. You ask AI researcher what intelligence means, they're going to give you lots of definitions. Usually it has become whatever it cannot be accomplished today, but in the future is AI. What we define today AI, in 5 years is going to be different. So I think that type of dynamism, that type of evolution, which is fast, I go back to this idea of technological acceleration because I think it's important, we need to grasp, we need to understand, we need to develop this language, the grammar rules. And the fact that we, after 4 years, it took, by the way, 4 years for this digital compact to be at least drafted, not ratified yet, I think it's a good step. Another aspect is that it was not only states. There were plenty of consultation papers submitted. In March, April, I had to review some of them. There are hundreds of submissions from universities, from civil organizations, from states, everyone, and that I found exciting. Everyone wants to understand and to be part of this kind of discussion. This is why I shared the ambassador optimism, among the optimists that, well, you know, while people fear the implication of AI, the fact that we're taking a step, a good one, trying to learn this language, I think it's moving us in the right direction. I think I moved away much from the question, you know.
But it's okay, because I have another one following up on what you just said. What do you see as the future of AI in diplomacy?
Well, which builds on you know, the question here on what is AI and how we negotiate. There are two interesting, amazing books that I'm reading right now, published this year. One, Raymond, the futurist. He anticipates that by 2045, there's going to be a technological, what he calls singularity. We are going to merge with AI. You know, what Musk is trying to put in the brain, that kind of extension, we're going to become some sort of cyborg. It's going to happen. Genetics and AI is going to come together. So that's one option. The other option, it's an interesting book published this year also by a professor from Harvard, The Importance of Being, which builds on Oscar Wilde, you know, writing, the importance of being educable. And he says, no, we shouldn't fear necessarily AI, because the word intelligence, it takes issue with the word intelligence, is more about whether we have this kind, what is intelligence nowadays, for instance, generative AI. What it does, it predicts words in a text. We don't associate human intelligence with this kind of operation. So what Leslie Valiant, the author of the second book, The Importance of Being Educable, says is that we should think less about intelligence, artificial intelligence. It's more about how we learn together with these instruments to develop, right? He says it's not going to, AI is not going necessarily to threaten us because it's incapable of thinking like us. And I think that has importance for diplomacy. Why it has importance for diplomacy? Because the challenge for Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for international organization, is what is applicable to diplomacy from an AI point of view and what is not. With AI, you can probably predict crisis. You can help with the international negotiation preparing text. What you cannot do, and I think, is this kind of, going back to the first question, the impersonal trust-building element that comes from human interaction. AI is not capable of this. You can predict what it can do, certain things, but that type of human quality is missing for AI, or, you know. So I think there are two options. I'm more inclined with the educable rather than the cyborg version, but that's probably where the thinking must probably is going to be.
To interact with the audience, I know that we have a representative of WIPO, Mr. Muller, here with us. Thank you for being with us. And you have a question for our speaker?
Thank you very much. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's okay? Yes.
The mic. Yes, it's coming.
Thank you. So my name is Benoit Müller. I'm a director at the World Intellectual Property Organization. I was supposed to be here with my colleague Ulrike Till, who unfortunately is ill. But I wanted to, I guess some of you may know, but WIPO as the global forum for intellectual property is also very active on these questions of artificial intelligence and intellectual property. So I just wanted to chime in here with that angle in this discussion. since I understand here you're mostly interested in, the impact on diplomacy, nevertheless, IP is interesting because it's always about balancing different interests, and that's been always the case since the beginning of IP. And we think that IP is part of the answer also to building trust in AI by precisely finding the right balance between the opportunities that these technologies provide to humanity while also limiting the risks. And WIPO, in fact, organized a very first meeting on IP and AI back in 1991, so not yesterday. And for the last 5 years, we've run very successful conversations around AI or new technologies, but in particular AI and IP, attracting thousands of people. And the next session, if you're interested, is on November 5 and 6, just across the Place des Nations, on the topic AI output, to protect or not to protect. That is the IP question. So also some literary analogy here, which I'm sure you find yourself. And we're also very interested, if you wish to organize a follow-up to this with maybe also IP as part of the discussion, we'd be very happy to be part of that debate. So thank you very much, and thank you to all speakers for brilliant remarks, which I think show how important these questions are for Geneva, for the UN, and for society. Thank you.
Any one of you wants to
Any comments?
Comment? IP and AI?
Well, maybe, I mean, for us, Switzerland, IP, of course, is very important. I mean, when we were also in the 19th century, we were not so much interested in IP because we were the rebels. But now when you, of course, achieve the level of development, you're more interested in IPs. But I think it's really what I said before, it's data and data and data. And that is finally also then, who owns this data? We were talking about, scientific papers. Who owns that? And I mean, it costs to make these papers, and so I think this will be one of the most crucial questions, I think, for when we talk about also really very specific digital governance or AI governance. How can we also curate and elevate the quality of the data? Because otherwise, I don't know, I'm not a physician, but there's this law of entropy that everything gets lower in quality because nobody has an interest in. Everybody wants to profit, but nobody wants to invest. So I think that's also a cycle that because if the data is getting worse and worse, AI is getting worse.
Amanda, you wanted to comment?
Sure, just to briefly, recognize, I think, really important kind of foundational remarks there in terms of recognizing the kind of multiple interests that are really important to protect and advancing governance for all of the issues that are really implicated for AI governance, including IP issues. And thinking about, the need, as we have been talking about, and other folks have mentioned, but thinking about the role of data and the role of data for achieving multiple different governance outcomes that we might want to really advance. Thinking about, strengthening fairness of AI systems, ensuring privacy of AI systems, and then also ensuring that we're respecting sort of rights holders' reservations that they may make about the use of their data. And so I think a lot of work is being done to try to try to advance practices across rights holders and across AI developers to ensure that there's sort of technical protocols in place to ensure that kind of access to data can be continue to advance for ensuring those kind of outcomes for the use of data, and also, again, that rights holders' reservations can be protected and respected.
So just to build on this point, I think it's IP. It's a very fascinating area moving forward. Why do I think so? So yes, it's about data. Data goes into an algorithm, and the algorithm does something with the data for which you have IP. We talk about generative AI, ChatGPTs. Why is generative? Because it generates something that didn't exist before. It takes text, it takes images, it takes sound, mixes up, and gets something new that didn't exist. Question then, who owns that type of rights for what was produced? It is the AI, is the machine, in the sense, the tech company. So there is something new here, which I think it's interesting to follow from an international legal perspective. At one point, I played a little bit with the ChatGPTs to try to understand how far they go with this. And they said, well, prepare me a draft of a convention for AI with 10 points. And if you do it, it's, one of them said, the first AI rights, a convention for AI rights, something new. It didn't exist. It's not negotiated by humans. It was proposed by that. And the AI rights proposed by ChatGPT, one of the points was an AI should not be deleted without its permission. So, well, this is what I'm saying, that from data that exists for which you have IP, something new is being produced. Who owns that type of new insight? It's an interesting aspect that probably has to be explored at some point.
Do we have any other question from the audience? Yes, we have one here and then another one with Max there. We can maybe just, and then we come to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Basim, founder of Consulto, which is a startup active in healthcare. We're developing an AI, and we are also supported by the Trust Valley. So my question goes to whoever want to answer to, but I think one thing that was very impressive is the definition of governance that Ambassador Wechsler gave, which is the constellation of power, or crystallization of power of sorts, which brings the, here in that case, the private sector, but we're speaking particularly on the big tech. But the question here is twofold, is who is going to be involved in this? Is it only the big tech? And if we're speaking about the big tech, are we speaking only about the ones that are currently active, which is speaking about the US, Western? Are we also including other big tech in other nations? Are we only including big tech, or are we also including smaller big techs? For example, in healthcare, while the big tech is really relevant, but for example, there are few players who are controlling medical data that are incredibly important in developing this. So how can we imagine involving the private sector more broadly, including smaller actors, and also across geopolitical conflicts? Thanks so much.
Yes, sure. I think, again, you have to really look at what are the movers and shakers in a policy field. And that can be open source organizations, can be user groups, can be consumer protection groups, that make, like coming back to this ILO, trade unions and employers. Back then, that was the fight. That was and the governments as states. But I think this something has to develop. And I was also as a sort of a tech ambassador, consul general in San Francisco, and I was unfortunately I could never assist because it was COVID, but I saw some of these developer conferences from the big tech companies. And this seemed to me a little bit like, this was huge assemblies, like sort of town hall meetings where you had different circles of, you had scientists, you had user groups, you had, different, and they all sort of came together to develop something. Of course, at the end, Apple wants to have his new iPhone, and of course, but it was a process of give and take and influencing. And I think maybe also we need to get inspirations from these sort of ways of forming a consensus or bringing in new ideas. And the multi-stakeholder approach, which is practiced in the Internet Governance Forum, has also some of these aspects. You might need to make it a little bit more hard in terms of outcomes. It's not just too much free floating. But I think there are already some valuable elements that you could build upon.
Amanda, would you like to add something?
Just to acknowledge that, I think it is really important that when we talk about having an inclusive process for developing AI governance sort of concepts, and then also going back to where I started today, really deepening implementation of those concepts and working together to really understand what those practices are going to mean for organizations of different sizes, from different sectors. AI governance is ultimately something that is really important to implement across the entire AI value chain. We talk about developers, deployers, users of AI technology all having important roles for managing AI risk. And so it is really important that all of those voices are reflected in processes. And also to acknowledge that that's not easy. Being a part of a lot of processes in which there's real intention to be having those various kind of stakeholders represented in the process. It's also, frankly, really evident sometimes that organizations, of course, have different resources to participate in those processes. So then, there just comes back to another thing I started with in terms of having there be sort of an iterative, agile way for organizations of all sizes and from different sectors to engage in different ways to really help shape implementation of these norms, I think is really important. I would just call attention to one thing I mentioned at the outset in terms of one forum that we're participating on, and among many, to try to really deepen implementation of policy norms, really kind of have an approach that recognizes where we are with kind of scientific consensus today and is helping to drive that conversation forward, is this kind of effort to implement the Hiroshima AI Process Code of Conduct and a reporting framework. And there has been this effort to have kind of small businesses and large organizations really participating in that. And I think it's been incredibly valuable. It's just one example of, again, many forums, but just to kind of show that having all kinds of organizations participate in those conversations can really ensure that the way that we go about trying to implement these norms and really get into the detail of how to do the practices is going to be manageable by everyone. And again, when everyone participates in the process, sort of everyone has a better shared understanding, which is really important when we think about kind of the coherent risk management efforts that are needed across the AI value chain.
On the question of the geopolitics of technology, which is again a very interesting field, growing. We don't know yet the winners and the losers. We may anticipate some, but we don't know because there are two layers. When you think about technology, as we discussed today, AI, we tend to focus on the soft side. Soft side meaning data and algorithms. There's also hardware side, the critical natural resources and the semiconductors. The battle, it's already has started on critical natural resources and semiconductors. You see, for instance, in this phone that you all have, there is so much critical rare earth materials. Probably, the comparison, for instance, with the NASA computers from 1960s, 70s, it's 3 times, 4 times more. So that's the challenge. So we see initiatives, for instance, on the data side, data diplomacy, in which in order to be able, a new type of alliances, let's say, in order to be able to function as a company in Europe or in other places, you have to comply with GDPR. So if you're an Australian company and you have a subsidiary in Europe, you need a data agreement in place in order to be able to function. So we see a little bit of that. It remains to be seen whether in AI we're going to be to have. But on the hard side, the battle already started. Semiconductor alliances you already see, and they're already a little bit visible with Taiwan and Korea, United States, Japan, especially in the context of the geopolitical tensions in China, with China in the Pacific. On the critical natural resources, you have strategies adopted by the European Union, by the United States. Part of the Trade and Technology Council, there was a working group about creating an alert system on possible shortages of critical natural resources. So the battle lines are drawn, at least on the hardware side. On the software side, which is, I think, the tip of the iceberg, probably, we have to pay attention.
We have a question over there. Max?
Thank you, Jérôme, and thank you very much for the event and the series. Fascinating, looking forward to the next ones. Max from the Simon Institute, so we specialize in tech policy or tech governance. It's hard to sort through all of the questions I would want to ask. I think just maybe one point is that I would caution against thinking that there's a cap to the capabilities that AI systems would develop at some point. I think given the uncertainty and the speed of the developments, I think we should be cautious and consider like all possible scenarios, the best ones, the worst ones, the ones where AI will hit the limit at some point, and the ones where we will hit a singularity. But I'd like to ask a question that is more about how geopolitics play a role in institutional design as we will negotiate a new scientific panel and a global dialogue on AI. So in the negotiations of the Global Digital Compact, there was a point of contention, which was this debate between should we have a multi-stakeholder model of governance involving states, the private sector, civil society, academia, etc., or should we stick to a state-based system? And there were very clear camps, and China is, to some extent, also arguing that we should not involve non-state actors too much in the UN system. And so are developing countries too, for whom sovereignty and sovereign power is a form of the expression of power in this world. So I'm kind of interested in how you would resolve this trade-off. Should we stick to a state-based system in the UN system? Should we opt for a multi-stakeholder model? But would this risk losing some countries at the table? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I see it more as a continuum or an equilibrium, you know, where we will end up. I mean, nobody wants a 100% state-centered solution, and probably nobody feels comfortable in just some sort of big, unfortunately also because of COVID, I couldn't assist at Burning Man, but Burning Man is maybe not a model for the world governance. So, you know, I think and maybe also we have to acknowledge that in some areas, you know, states, the populations would like to have more of a say. Some areas you could say, well, you know, we can let more freeway to science and private sector. I mean, you know, coming back to the Key of Bern, back then all railways were private. And the United States as well back then. And then we said, well, you know, this is just too important of an infrastructure, because if you don't have a railway in your valley, you're cut off any economic growth. So we want to have some mechanism that makes sure that all parts of the country are somehow connected. So and then that's what states do. I mean, they can, in a democratic way, weigh out interests and balance interests so that you arrive at a state. That's also something. By the way, we had an example where we were looking with AI at the Pareto optimal solutions, so that you can improve everybody's life without making others' lives worse. I mean, that should be a goal of any democratic system, because that's where you bring your people further. So I think it's not a black or white, and I think that's also what the discussions in the GDC have shown.
Amanda, I see you nodding.
Just to agree with the comments about not being black or white, and there being a role for both types of forums. And really, I'm also thinking about, I'm reflecting on some work that we've done over the past year that I mentioned earlier, and looking across other domains and understanding the role of international governance and how that might apply to AI, and what lessons there might be for AI governance. And one of the contributions that we had from an expert that was really looking across other domains like civil aviation, like financial services, like nuclear technology, and looking at international governance structures, really commented on the kind of moment that we're in the history of international governance, being one in which naturally we are having kind of more formal state-based institutions and more informal initiatives, which may be multilateral, which may be state-based, or maybe multi-stakeholder, sort of working together in the kind of governance system for different domains, and that really being just a general kind of characteristic of international governance across domains in the recent kind of couple of decades versus in the mid-century, mid-last century, when a lot of international governance institutions were instantiated. And that just being, again, a characteristic that applies to AI, applies to other domains. And so then the kind of project being about how do we sort of maximize coordination across these different efforts, and hopefully minimize sort of competition across them, so that we can get kind of alignment and strong implementation of the governance norms that we're trying to set through coordination across all of these different forms working together.
I think the question is, if I understood it correctly, it's institutional design. To what extent, in addition to states, like in a UN Security Council, we ask Amanda to come to represent Microsoft. Shall we put Microsoft in the UN Security Council, or Elon Musk? I think that's, I thought that might be. By the way, I mean, Microsoft already has an office at the UN, so it's not, it's taking steps towards, comes with a lot of questions, right? One, I think states will be still jealous, but they have to recognize power. This is how it works, right? If you demonstrate power, and then you have to acknowledge that without that stakeholder, it's very difficult to get things done. Now, how much you elevate that entity into the global structure of power? With the organization for states, there is this kind of democratic argument, although not all states are democratic, that they represent someone, citizens. And there is a history of how these states were formed. Now, with the non-state actors of this kind, although they wield a lot of power, the role at the table remains contested at the moment. There have been suggestions, exactly this, right? To put them at least as non-permanent members. Another issue that we have to consider is that these tech companies, they look very powerful today, but in 10 years, they might not be there. OpenAI, until 2 or 3 years ago, nobody heard of. And it's probably going to overtake some of the traditional tech companies. So there is also a question of stability and continuity. But the question about power, which I think it's at the core of your queries, it's the right one. How do we incorporate these powerful actors into the system? And it's not an easy one. You've seen probably, even in UK, Elon Musk started to interfere in domestic politics. And the prime minister was, hey, Elon Musk, behave. That was basically its only reaction, because it didn't have too much leverage to. So probably going to see more of that, not less.
Maybe a last round of comments from our speakers. What would you like our audience to take away tonight?
Well, I think recently I had an interview with my first avatar on the Swiss Digital Foreign Policy. It's on LinkedIn or Instagram. And most of the comments I got back was, well, we prefer you in real. So that was comforting for me. But still, Amanda, we're not 100% sure if you're really Amanda. There's no watermark. There's no, it says Amanda. And honestly, I must say, my avatar the problem was he couldn't mimic the Swiss-German mouth movement, because the AI was mostly on High German. So everybody could see, well, that's not Benedikt. But, they will get there as well. So I think we shouldn't be too afraid of. I think the strength of the original is still there, and the tech diplomacy. I think diplomats, if you really, maybe Raymond, hope you agree, and I see also Dardel there. It's about bringing people together and finding information which is relevant for you. And real relevant. When we were writing cables back home to the ministry, we always said, well, we shouldn't write something which is already in the newspapers. Some colleagues, they sort of rewrite a little bit what's in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung. But when you're really going out for the real, genuine, new information, and I think that is still our business. And AI makes it easier, because we can prepare a better basis for our information hunt, in a way. We can gather with more people and bring more people together in order to get to information, but then to get to the real genuine information, not just, even if generative AI maybe made something new out of it, but I think it's there we can still trust ourselves this capability to actually even do better.
Amanda, last words.
I think building on the last comments about thinking about opportunities for AI and where the technology could really complement what we're trying to achieve, and thinking about where I started again with the kind of adoption and use of the technology and learning from that, feeding back into our ongoing effort to govern AI effectively and really continuously improve guardrails as we learn through adoption and use, and as we also go through this effort of really defining in more detail what some of our governance norms mean in practice, and continuously advancing the science of AI, including through the independent international scientific panel and the kind of complementary research efforts that are happening internationally, including through AI safety institutes that hopefully will be in conversation with what that panel is really building in terms of scientific consensus. Having that all, again, continuously feed back into our governance norms and our implementation of them, and really thinking about this being an iterative process and how we can leverage kind of agile processes and institutions to enable that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that two challenges in front of us, of all of us, each of us, because we are going through a big technological transformation. So one challenge is to do exactly what we do here, try to understand what is this new animal, technology, AI, metaverse, whatever comes. What does it mean? How does it work? What are the consequences? What is the impact? How is it going to affect this? How is it going to affect that? That's one challenge. And I think this is what we... The other challenge, which I found it interesting, is that for us at the individual level, what does it mean for us? What kind of society are we building? The point I'm trying to make is that AI is not the end. It has to be integrated in the type of society that we build, or we try to build. So I found myself interestingly baffled, because I don't know what is going on with the society. I see all kind of toxicity emerging, all kind of negative stuff. And you find, the people are anxious, are nervous. They don't understand what is going on. Not with AI necessarily, but with all these indirect implications on society. So what I found interesting, and this is what I started actually in one of my courses to assign, humanities, rhythms from humanities. I go back to Renaissance. I go back to Enlightenment. I think we need to read a little bit of more literature, more political theory, more philosophy, more, traditional music. This is how others before us went through big process of transformation, trying to understand, to develop some cultural anchors to keep them grounded in periods of big transformation. It's good that you try to understand the technical aspect, but I think we should also don't lose sight. What does it mean for the society that actually it's moving more or less without us? Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our three distinguished speakers. Allow me just one comment. If you're really interested in AI, we are organizing a very cool event here during Democracy Week. We put AI to court, and we're doing a fictitious trial of AI here on the 11th of October in the evening, so you're welcome to join. It's also happening in Zurich in November and in Lugano in December. And on the 4th of November, we have the pleasure to welcome Professor Shannon Valor, who wrote the book AI Mirror. It's a very interesting book I recommend you to read. And she's coming here for a discussion. Benedikt, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you very much. It was a great discussion to open the next conversation. And yes, I think this is the first time that we can have this discussion together. And let's continue that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.